Appeasement leading to World War II.
Appeasement is the policy of making concessions to dictatorial powers in order to avoid conflict. Appeasement was a very popular policy among leaders in the 1930s, especially the French and the British. In fact, if you were to type appeasement on Google, a link would show up on the side of the screen that would lead you to a page about the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain became the British Prime Minister in 1937. Having lived through World War I, he wished to avoid another war at any cost, and because of this, Chamberlain's way of dealing with Adolf Hitler, the Chancellor of Germany, was one of appeasement. Now, Hitler saw this as a weakness, so he decided to take advantage of it. The only problem was that Hitler did not know how far he could push Chamberlain or any other democratic leader before they would say no. Hitler then decides to see how far he can push without a response by rearming the Rhineland. This was in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles, which stated that the Germans were unable to possess any fortifications in the Rhineland. And even though it was in direct violation of the treaty, the world still did nothing. This was one of the first acts of appeasement leading to World War II. When Hitler receives no response, he decides to push it a little more. On March 12, 1938, Hitler marched his army straight into the heart of Austria, to the capital city of Vienna. Due to there not being a single bullet shot, Hitler was able to say that it was a unification of two countries that were unjustly kept apart. Once again, Hitler had broken the Treaty of Versailles, as Germany and Austria were not allowed to ever be unified. And even though Hitler had just annexed an entire country, the Democrats once again chose to appease him by letting him keep Austria rather than doing something to stop him. Neither France nor Great Britain did anything to stop the advancement of the German army, under the pretense that they did not possess a large enough military. In addition, the countries were still suffering economically from the after effects of the First World War, as well as the far reaches of the Great Depression. Still receiving no response, Hitler started to think that he was unstoppable. Hitler and his advisors then start to plan their next move, the invasion of Czechoslovakia. When Chamberlain hears of these plans, he decides to have a meeting with the Chancellor himself. At this meeting, Chamberlain and Hitler talk about the future of Czechoslovakia. At first, Hitler only asked for the parts of Czechoslovakia that had a German population of over 50%. Chamberlain thought this was a reasonable cost in exchange for a lasting peace, so he agrees to these terms. However, Hitler then decides that that was not good enough. What he really wanted was the Sudetenland. The Sudetenland was approximately one-third of the Czechoslovakia. However, it contained most of the resources. The Sudetenland contained 66% of the Czechs' coal, 70% of its iron and steel, and almost 70% of its electrical power. Without the Sudetenland, it would only be a matter of time before the Czechs were conquered. Hitler then gives Chamberlain time to consider his demands before agreeing to meet again with him in Munich. When Chamberlain comes to the conclusion that the Sudetenland was worth a lasting peace, he decides to fly to Munich.
The German Chancellor, because the situation seems to me to be one in which discussions between him and me may have useful consequences. My policy has always been to try to ensure peace, and the Führer's ready acceptance of my suggestion encourages me to hope that my visit to him will not be without result.
At the meeting are Hitler, Mussolini, Neville Chamberlain, and the French Premier Edward Daladier. Since Chamberlain had already come to the conclusion that the Sudetenland was worth a lasting peace, he was working on trying to convince the French Premier to agree with his plan. When the French Premier also agreed that the Sudetenland was worth a lasting peace, they agreed to sign it over to the Germans on the condition that they would advance no further. For the final time, Hitler was appeased. The British and the French had signed over the Sudetenland. What made this even worse was the fact that the British had sworn to protect Czechoslovakia, and they had just signed it over to the Germans without even a fight. When Chamberlain was questioned about this, he responded, "However much we may sympathize with a small nation confronted by a big and powerful neighbor, we cannot in all circumstances undertake to involve the whole British Empire in war simply on her account." If we must fight, it has to be on a larger issue than that. When Chamberlain had returned to London, he waved the Munich Agreement in the air and said that he had achieved peace in our time. However, this was not the case, as several months later, Hitler conquered the remainder of Czechoslovakia. Realizing that his plan had failed, Chamberlain soon promised the Polish people the full support of Britain should they ever be attacked by the Germans. On September 1st, 1939, the German army crossed the border between Germany and Poland. Keeping their promises, the United Kingdom and France joined Poland in declaring war on Germany, with Canada following a few days later. At that time, appeasement failed, and the Second World War began.